I just got done watching Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and this is an absolute incredible follow-up from Mission Impossible Fallout, and an incredible start to this next story for Ethan Hunt, and as well as very much a love letter to the entire Mission Impossible franchise. We're going to go a little bit deeper on that in a second, but hi, my name is Zach. Thank you so much for clicking on this. This is going to be a non-spoiler movie review for this film. You do not want to know anything about this film. I'm very much just going to talk about certain things that we've seen in the trailer, as well as what you can expect from this film. And if you can't tell, I absolutely love this movie. The Mission Impossible franchise for me has always been one that I didn't fully grow up with, but I finally came back and tuned into it after Mission Impossible 4, which I think is when a lot of people started diving into this. Went back, watched the entire franchise. I really much liked the entire franchise, but Mission Impossible Fallout, when that film released, it blew my mind, because that film was, and I'll say this, it is one of the best action films of all time. And when Christopher McQuarrie made that, I'm like, yeah, this is when you stop, dude, and you go do something else. And Tom Cruise, maybe you should even stop here. Maybe this is where the franchise should end. And then they ended up announcing a part 1 and a part 2, that McQuarrie was coming back, Tom Cruise was coming back, and I'm not gonna lie, I got nervous, because I'm like, how do you top Fallout? How do you go above and beyond? And I was worried that they were going to jump the shark, per se, like Fast and Furious did. I was also nervous that it was going to become more about the stunts than the story, and that it was going to be the same thing that we've seen in, of course, Rogue Nation and Fallout, and, you know, I was worried that this was going to be the same thing again. Because honestly, the thing that I've really liked about the entire Mission Impossible franchise is each and every one of the films has different sort of sense and style to it, and very much that's because of the directors involved. And thankfully, what McQuarrie does here is he showcases his talents as a director and writer by making a movie that is vastly different than the previous Mission Impossible film, and very much infusing all of the best elements through every single one, which is why this is very much a love letter. Now, before we get any further into this, though, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and make sure to also leave your thoughts down below. I will have a full Mission Impossible ranking the week of release for this film, so if you are interested in that ranking, make sure to look out for that. And diving back into this, on my pros, why is it a love letter? If you want to go from the first Mission Impossible film, which is very much has these Dutch angles, this Mission Impossible Hitchcockian thriller, that's not a film that's mostly relies on action or stunts. There's definitely thrilling stunts, and there's definitely great action, but that is a film that really much heavily relies on paranoia. What McQuarrie takes from that is that same thing. He takes that paranoia, he takes even the Dutch angles and the way that the film is edited, and actually infuses that in here. Then you go to Mission Impossible 2, which is very much a John Woo film. I like that film to a certain extent. It is definitely the worst Mission Impossible film. But one of the best aspects of that, I actually thought, was some of the flavor and some of the zaniness of the action set pieces. And McQuarrie somehow infuses that, but never tilters and breaks that fine line. And then you have Mission Impossible 3, which has the great intensity, and I love the fever pitch editing of that. That's poured into this film. And of course, Ghost Protocol. Ghost Protocol kind of brings that more humor to the Mission Impossible franchise, that great team aspect. You get that back. Rogue Nation and Fallout had the incredible stunts. And of course, alongside the incredible stunts, you have the amazing Rebecca Ferguson. That's also added into there. And you shake that up, and McQuarrie brings all those different flavors, but makes it work as one. And it sounds insane, but somehow he did it. And maybe it won't work for everybody, but I was honestly flabbergasted by within the first 20 minutes of how much this felt like the original Mission Impossible film, and how the rest of the film really plays out in that way. And again, Christopher McQuarrie as a writer and director here really again showcases, and he is the star here, showing how different of a film it can be, and actually really making me excited for part 2, and exceeding any expectations I had for this movie, because the trailers look fantastic. I expected this movie to be good, but it's just as good as Fallout in a lot of different departments. And it's a very different film at the same time, specifically in the way that he even structures set pieces. There's so many set pieces in here that I freaking love! Of course, like a lot of people will be probably talking about the set pieces where he jumps off the cliff on the motorcycle, or when he's on the train. But there's other set pieces alongside here, one that's in the desert. In general, this entire pickpocketing scene that takes place on an airport, the way that all the moving pieces work in there, I started sweating watching that sequence. And even the hand-to-hand fight scenes in here, I would still say the bathroom scene in Mission Impossible 6 is probably still my favorite hand-to-hand fight scene, but there's a couple that are very close encounters, specifically one with Palm, who plays Mantis, and she was great in here as well, that's in this close little corridor that I was just sitting there, I'm like, this is fantastic. If I want to dive off McQuarrie and his fantastic directing in here, and of course the set pieces that he did create in here, because again, the stunts are just absolutely phenomenal. Those are the reasons. This is the type of movie that makes you want to go see movies in a movie theater. This is the reason to go to the movie theaters. But if we want to talk about the performances, Tom Cruise is excellent as Ethan Hunt. This actually feels like a very personal mission, and I know we've felt that before in quite a few others, but there's this mystery that's still looming that we don't really get to figure out all completely in part 1, and I'm excited to see, with that now introduced, what they do with part 2. And I think Cruise just does and outdoes himself time and time again. Is this one of his best performances? No, but he's still absolutely incredible, and the way that he does the stunts, the way that he just breathes that passion into this character, into this franchise, you feel it in every sort of frame. And again, him and McQuarrie working off one another just proves so much. And then we also have Rebecca Ferguson, who is, for me, one of the best additions, if not my favorite personal character in the entire Mission Impossible franchise. Now, there's some things they do with her character in this that I don't think will work for everyone. For me, it did. And I think it actually brought a lot of different avenues to the entire franchise, and I thought Ferguson was absolutely incredible. Again, they could spin this character off in so many different routes, and I would be there 10 times fold. But the other big impression of this film is, of course, you know that you're going to like Vanessa Kirby because she was great in the last one. You know you're going to like Simon Pegg because he's fantastic as Dunn. And Ving Rhames is always fun as Luther. For me, what actually really surprised me in this movie was the newcomers. The newcomers in here, whether it's Palm, like I mentioned, who I thought was fantastic. I love her as Mantis in Guardians, but this is a whole different side of her that you haven't seen before. Or either Isai Morales, who I might be mispronouncing that. He's great as the villain in here. Really love what they did with him. But the true standout of this entire film, right alongside Tom Cruise, is Haley Atwell, who I feel for her entire career, and specifically what they had used with her in the Marvel Universe, which is what she's very much known for, she was just underutilized. The Peggy Carter show was great, but underutilized completely. And I was worried that, she was going to be in here for a gimmick because she was in the MCU and all that stuff, and she is undeniably incredible in here. She is fantastic. And just like how Rebecca Ferguson made such a point when she came and approached in Rogue Nation, it's the same thing for her. Those two, I love Ethan Hunt, but those two, undeniably are, maybe my top 2 favorite characters in this entire franchise. I genuinely mean that because of the chemistry, the charisma, and her performance. And every sort of little nuance that she gives in here, she really gives Ethan Hunt a run for his money. And you see that through all the different set pieces, whether against the airport pickpocketing scene that I mentioned, or if you want to talk about the car chase sequence within that little yellow car that we've seen in the trailers, that sequence alone was just mind-blowing. There's things they pull off in here that just made my jaw drop. And I'll be honest, there's a whole sequence that if you saw Fast X earlier this year, it's kind of just like it, and I liked Fast X. It wasn't a great movie, but it was fun for what it was. It made me like that movie less because this you could tell was practical, and that was completely CGI. And I went into this movie expecting, this is probably going to be good. And I walked out just absolutely floored by the incredible action set pieces, by also the story, which I haven't really talked about yet. The story is very topical. And I'm going to talk about one thing that I think will be mixed completely across the board, and I don't know how to personally feel on it yet. I need to see how part 2 comes out. But I found that the story here is probably one of the more intriguing stories that we've gotten yet in the Mission Impossible franchise. And I think a lot of that is because it is very talky-talking. They actually give depth to a lot of this stuff. And it might come off cheesy for some in certain departments, but I just sat there eating up everything. All the zaniness, all the creativeness, and in general, the hauntingness of the future because of how topical the story really much is. And as someone who has always liked all the Mission Impossible movies, has loved some of the Mission Impossible movies, sometimes character development isn't the best in all of them, and also sometimes the missions are a little bit repetitive. For this one, there's a repetitiveness to it, but I always found that in this one, all the stunts really came together within what needed to happen in this story as well. And I think Fallout does that very well, but everything just seems so seamless, so timely, and just so thrilling. And talking about thrilling, the pacing of this, it's 2 hours and 43 minutes, which I'm not going to lie. I saw that at work, the day after recording this. It's like, what, almost midnight my time right now as I'm recording this. 2 hours and 43 minutes. I don't got a lot of time for films with those runtime. This film absolutely earns it in every single way. It is one of the fastest moving films I've seen in a long time. And I've seen a lot of long movies this year. Like, if we want to look at Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, if we want to look at even John Wick, which I love John Wick, but John Wick, I can feel the pacing in just a couple moments. I did not feel the pacing whatsoever in here. Maybe that'll change when I view it again. But I am so excited to go and see this film again. I want to spend another 2 hours and 43 minutes with Ethan Hunt and with his crew because of how excited I am. And maybe I just sound like a giant fanboy. Maybe I'm just sitting here, but this is how I review movies. I'm passionate about it, and I freaking love it. I'm trying not to cuss, but I freaking love this movie. I'm going off the cuff on this one because it's great. And I didn't even mention this yet. Lorne Balfe's score in here, I loved what he did in Fallout. This score, though, fantastic. And I think going back to McQuarrie once again, the usage of score and the classic Mission Impossible theme, it's utilized so impressively well. Like, there's a lot of sequences where there's no sound, there's not really any soundtrack or score going off, it's just characters talking, and you're glued to the damn screen. And that all screams back to, again, what Brian De Palma did with the first Mission Impossible film, with that Hitchcockian paranoia to it all. And in this film, you feel that paranoia within the sci-fi world. You're gripping your knuckles during every sort of sequence and stunt. And in the end of the day, when the film ended, I just sat there going, I need part 2 right now. I hope to God that film does not get delayed because the wait will kill me. Like I did mention, I did have one thing I'm mixed on and I don't know how to feel about yet, and I need to see how they execute it in part 2, and that comes down to the villain. So Mission Impossible, when you do look at the villains, sometimes they're a little bit weak. I have honestly found that in the first film, the villain was weak. The second film, they were very unforgettable. 3, Philip Seymour Hoffman, honestly, is just an incredible actor, so his villain comes out in a lot of different lights. Ghost Protocol, I don't really remember all too much. It was fine. Rogue Nation, Solomon Lane was cool, and I thought Fallout and Rogue Nation were a great companion piece. But in here, this potentially has to be one of the most unique villains I have seen in a movie, that it feels so topical of what's going on in Hollywood today, as well in our world. And it's been in some of the marketing, so I'm going to say allude to what it is, but it's I don't even know. I don't even want to say what it is because I wish I didn't know going into this movie what it was, but I'm just going to leave it as is. Maybe you've heard about it, maybe you haven't. We can talk about it more in the comment section. I'll definitely talk about it more in my ranking, but the villain of this film, which is played by Morales, I thought he plays this character named Gabriel, which is great, but it's who he's working for, and when that is revealed very early on in the film by far, it's not going to work for everybody. And at first I was like, that's interesting. But as it played out and the way that they actually used it, it felt very realistic and very haunting. And that's what sold me on it. Some of the dialogue can definitely be cheesy on it, but it never for a second feels fake. And that's what sold me on this. We have to remember that this is a fantasy at times. This is a spy thriller, and not all spy thrillers are real. But this entire concept and who Morales is working for, that reveal, again, not going to work for everybody, but it worked for me. I do need to put it in the mixed concept because if part 2 doesn't execute it as well as I found that part 1 did, or in general just laying it out, because that's what part 1 does. It lays out what this is. And the whole story of, like, they have to get this key. If part 2 doesn't finalize that and finish it out in a very great way, then, part 1's villain kind of falls apart in a lot of ways. And you can even say the same thing about the entire story. This film's going to very much rely on part 2. Not to say that it ends in a way where it's like, oh shit, like, come on, man. Like, I know how some people felt with Across the Spider-Verse or even Fast X, but the way it ended, I felt satisfied, but wanting that next chapter. And part 2 is going to be a big part to that all. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning honestly dropped my jaw. McQuarrie infuses tech paranoia, Hitchcockian intensity, and white-knuckle action set pieces that remind you why movies like this must be seen in theaters. Cruise, Atwell, Ferguson are at the top of their game, and honestly, I was blown away. My one issue, and it's not really an issue, but I think the one mixed aspect will definitely be the villain. I need to see where that goes next, but this delivers everything that you absolutely want, from suspenseful moments to an absolute great action set pieces, but at the center of it all, a very topical story that at the same part of it all is haunting, terrifying, and I honestly haven't felt that paranoia feel in a spy thriller since the first Mission Impossible film. When I went back to rewatch it every time, it's one of the few spy thrillers that really give me that paranoia feel, and I love Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. This movie is incredible. I can't wait for part 2. I can't wait to hear your guys' thoughts. So with all that said, I'm going to give this film an A. I'm so close to giving this film an A+, but I really need to see part 2 on this department. And other than that, I love this movie. I can't wait to hear your guys' thoughts. Thank you so much again for watching this. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe for more. And of course, until next time, stay classy.